The silence between us. The house had never felt louder than when it was quiet. Ava stood in the middle of the living room, her hands loosely holding the edge of an old photograph, edges curled from years of shifting sunlight. Dust floated in the beam coming through the bay window, soft and golden, like the memory of a voice she hadn't heard in too long. There were no footsteps echoing down the hall, no radio humming from the kitchen, no laugh rising unexpectedly from behind a book. Just the stillness, thick and unmoving, wrapping around her like a second skin. It wasn't that he was gone. Not in the final sense people whispered about in grocery store aisles, or between cautious glances. He was still in town, still living just a few blocks away. But something unseen had stretched between them like a pane of glass, transparent, delicate, unbreakable. They hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Not since that evening in the garden when words had failed them both, dissolving into the air like mist. She shifted her weight, the floorboard beneath her heel creaking. It startled her, as though the house itself was reminding her she was not entirely alone. The photograph in her hands showed a moment from last spring, when they had gone hiking through the hills outside of town. He was in the background, half turned toward her, mouth open mid-sentence. She could almost hear what he'd been saying, something about the way the wind carried the scent of honeysuckle higher than the trees. It had been warm that day, the kind of warmth that didn't just sit on the skin but settled deep in the bones. She remembered laughing, not at what he said but simply because he was there. Setting the photo down on the table, Ava moved toward the kitchen and opened a cabinet, not looking for anything in particular. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory guiding them through the ritual of making tea. It wasn't a cure for loneliness, but it filled time, gave her fingers something to do besides tremble. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, and she watched as the water began to blur the metal around the edges, a sign that it was nearly ready. There had been no fight. That's what made the silence so unbearable. No last words shouted in frustration, no accusations thrown like sharp stones. Just a slow dimming of the light in his eyes when they looked at each other, and an ever-growing gap in their conversations. They'd stopped finishing each other's thoughts. Then they stopped beginning them at all. A knock at the front door snapped her attention back to the present. She paused, mug halfway to her mouth, heart fluttering once in her chest. But it wasn't him. Of course it wasn't. It was just the mail, nothing more than envelopes and flyers with no intention of filling the void he'd left behind. Back in the living room, the light had shifted again. Shadows reached across the floor, stretching like long arms trying to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?